On the morning following his reception into the Catholic Church, the brilliant thinker G.K. Chesterton hurried home and furiously scribbled a poem that had suddenly invaded his consciousness. The poem, which he dubbed The Convert, concluded with these words: "The sages have 100 maps to give. They trace their crawling cosmos like a tree. They rattle reason out through many a sieve that stores the sand and lets the gold go free. And all these things are less than dust to me, because my name is Lazarus, and I live." Likewise, Tammy Peterson has joined G.K. Chesterton in Coming Gloriously Home. Tammy Peterson on conversion and the Catholic faith now. My name is Todd Warner, and this is the Evangelization Culture Podcast from Word on Fire. Tammy Peterson is a wife and a mother, a licensed massage therapist, and the host of the Tammy Peterson Podcast. After graduating from high school in 1979, she moved to Central Canada, where she worked, studied, and was married in 1989. Tammy raised 2 children with her husband, Jordan, and has 3 grandchildren whom she adores. Tammy attended university and studied kinesiology and visual art. She owned and operated a massage therapist business for 30 years. Most recently, Tammy also spent 3 years working as a logistics consultant for her husband, Jordan, organizing his daily itinerary on his sold-out worldwide book tour. They traveled the world giving talks in 140 cities. But in 2019, she suffered and recovered from a near-fatal illness, which changed and deepened her understanding of how life ought to be lived. Over the last several years, Tammy toured in the United States, in Australia, and Europe to over 250 cities with her husband. During this tour, she opened most shows with her personal reflections on the chapters of the book Beyond Order. At the Easter Vigil in 2024, Tammy was received into the Catholic Church. Tammy Peterson, once again, welcome.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
It's good to have you. Segment 1, The Road to Conversion. In our last podcast conversation, Tammy Peterson and I discussed what might be described as a strong-headed Tammy Peterson. As Tammy told me when she left home as a young woman, she said, quote, "I was going to be somebody who could take care of my own destiny, who would make my own decisions. I was the one who was in control and would get myself out of tight spots." That, Tammy confessed, worked for quite a long time. But since that time, a lot has happened. Marriage to Jordan, a career in massage therapy, the joys and trials of child rearing, the explosion of publicity for Tammy and her husband, and then a rare cancer diagnosis that looked as if it would end it all. So Tammy, first of all, thank you so much for coming back. It's just great to be with you.
My pleasure.
It's great to be with you. I want to ask you to follow on that lead in. What did life do to the supremely confident younger version of yourself?
Well, many, many things. So in preparation for this podcast, I had to think about what has changed. What has changed? What virtues have, shown themselves since my awareness. Since my awareness that I was not in the driver's seat any longer. And we came up with 30 virtues that have changed. 30.
Wow. Some
of them being, a better listener, a better mother, I've done, quite a bit of work on showing my light. Maybe I hid it under a bushel before. Maybe I'm not hiding it anymore. Well, the list goes on and on. Let's see, I have the list right here.
I love it.
I have to look it up. It says, more like I was when I was a little kid. Now, Jordan's known me since I was 8 years old, so he would know what I was like back when I was a little kid. So he said I'm more like I was when I was a little kid. More playful, less cynical, less volatile. I don't think I was very volatile, but anyway, less volatile. Less concerned with control and power.
Wow.
Right? More patient, more loving, More centered on the well-being of others. Yeah. More hospitable. That's a big deal. More obedient. More in the moment. More beautiful. Warmer. More discriminating. More elegant. More composed. More resilient. More graceful. More socially appropriate. Better as a mother. Easier to negotiate with. More willing to listen and speak. More on target with my words. Deeper thinker. More creative. Easier to work with. A better boss. Sexier. More trust in the courageous way. More courageous in a trusting way. More self-reflective. That's a lot of things.
Wow.
That's a lot of things.
No, that's great. And first of all, thank you for also being so discerning in that consideration coming into the podcast. That's amazing. That's amazing. And we're talking about in the time, I mean, in a short lifetime, in a short span within that lifetime when this transition occurred. What strikes me most, and it leads me into my next question about that I was going to ask you, was the role that humility played in opening you up to God. Not that you were ever closed to God, but opening you even further. When you said all those things, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, it makes me relax because it's almost like you allowed yourself to be yourself. There was a surrender. There was an openness to wonder, that childlike sense that I don't need to have absolutely everything in its place and run the show. I can surrender some of that control, and in so doing, be more fully myself. Is there a kind of an arrival at yourself as you truly are supposed to be?
Oh, absolutely. You know, when I was a young kid, I used to spend my time playing Barbie dolls. I liked dressing my Barbies. I met someone recently who said when she used to play with her dolls, she set up a pulpit and she set up her teddy bears and her dolls to be the congregation. And
with a message to give.
With a message to give, and that's what she does. I dressed my Barbie dolls.
Yeah,
that's what I was doing. You know, they had high heels on, and they were. But I also used to have a tape recorder, and I would, with my friend, I would sing songs into the tape recorder, and I would sit at the piano and play the piano and sing, and so I always had a feeling that having an audience would be something that was naturally interesting to me. But I never pursued that. Yeah. I never pursued either of those things. I pretty much did what was most practical, and that worked for a long time. But it wasn't as much fun, and that was the other thing I wanted to say was, you know you're in the right place when you want to play.
Yeah.
And I don't think that I was fully in a place of play, so I wasn't fulfilling that spiritual contract of sharing what it was that was best in me. Yeah.
There's a German, I think, sociologist named Hartmut Rosa, and I came across a concept that he has put out in the last number of years about resonance, about something. It's almost ineffable to describe or to apprehend, but the notion that what you are doing when you're arriving at who you truly are is it just feels right. It's not a struggle. It's not a fight. There's not ongoing tension. I'm sort of just doing it. It's sort of like the notion of a surgeon who's so well practiced with his or her hands that the hands almost lead unconsciously. And there's just a sense of I don't know, poetry in motion, if you will. Do you feel like and I'm not trying to make it's not a spiritual concept, but it's a notion of just being more fully in keeping with who you were called to be. You sound like you're resonating with where you are now compared to where you might have been previously. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think it is a spiritual concept. I think it's the intention, right, in the beginning. It's the intention of wanting to be conscious of what is the best idea to go forward, and not trying to impose that, but to pay attention, right? To pay attention to what is best, and also then what is next. And if you pay attention to what should come next, that brings you to community.
Yes.
So that brings you into a bigger audience of people that you can share with and play with, like I said, negotiate with to find common ground that is of a place that neither of you knew existed before.
Right.
Yeah.
Incredible. Let's talk a little bit about your road to conversion. So Chesterton, who I'm going to quote a lot because he's a favorite of mine, he once observed, "The church is a house with 100 gates, and no two men enter at exactly the same angle." And Flannery O'Connor said, "I think most people come to the church by means the church does not allow, else there would be no need of their getting to her at all." So what began your road to your ultimate conversion to the Catholic Church?
Well, it happened, I think, a long time ago. I can't remember if I told you this before, but my grandfather died when I was 5, and everyone went to the funeral, and I was sent to the playground with my cousins that are of the same age, and I thought, this seems kind of odd that I'm not at the funeral. And so then that put a question in my mind, very, very young, about the significance of death. And your grandfathers die when your grandmother and grandfather die when you're fairly young usually. Right. And so that's just a natural bringing to consciousness death. But it was interesting, and I was curious about it early on. And one of my grandmothers was very much willing to talk to me about philosophical issues, and she was the matron in an old folks home, so we used to go there and play. So then there was that end of life aspect there, but she in herself was grateful for every day up until she died when she was 98 years old. Grateful for every day, but her whole family by then, her husband, all her children, all her siblings were all gone, and she was the one left. And she would wake up and she'd say, "Isn't it a gorgeous day? But today would be a good day to die." So she was ready to go, but grateful for the day, and that was quite a lesson for me.
Sure.
And that happened more when I was in my 20s when she passed away, and then of course my marriage to Jordan, because when the night that he asked me to marry him, he said, "You're going to have to tell, if this is going to work, you have to tell the truth." And so then I had to look at my life and see how I was, all my relationships, what were they like, and was there truth here? Were there any places where I was being deceptive, or if I was avoiding situations? And so so then again that broadened what it was that I was attending to. So it started when I was very, very young, but really, it was that moment when I was very, very ill and came home to tell my son and told him, and saw a young man thinking about the fact that he was going to lose his mother, to see that in his eyes and to see his love reflected back on me, the love that I had for him reflected back to me, made me feel worthwhile in a way that I had never felt that way before. And really, I really did feel I felt my cynicism and doubt just leave my shoulders. I really felt like I'd had a backpack on and it was gone. And I felt filled with the Holy Spirit, this beautiful love that I'd never experienced. And it was so calm. It was so peaceful that there was nothing left to worry about. And I told my son, only God knows when I'm going to die. We'll just take each day with gratitude from here and accept whatever comes our way. And that is how I felt for the rest of the time I was ill. Even when there were months with no answers, I would just pray. I would pray, and my family were very good. They came to visit me all the time. They were very attentive, and I didn't worry. Yeah. It was remarkable, actually.
This story, this story, I want to point people to our previous conversation also, because we really went into depth about this moment.
Yeah.
And to again circle back to that, you went into that moment to talk to your son about this grave, assuredly fatal disease you've been diagnosed with, this cancer. And as you told me last time, I think you said, you know, I've had my family members that died at a young age. It just may be the way it is, and I'm kind of at peace with this. And you had this conversation with your son saying, you know, effectively, this is what's happening, and this is the way I'm going to die, and I'm okay with that. And he was effectively like, oh, I'm not okay with that. And in him doing that, it was, as you've described, it was like you said, this calm, but it was a epiphany for you to say, no, wait a second, I need to, it's like your world got turned upside down with the way you were approaching it, and now the way you're going to approach it. It was this seismic change. Is that fair to say?
Oh, sure. You know, but the doctor, when he told me this prognosis, I was sitting in the office with my husband, so I didn't have to tell him. I didn't even really have to pay attention to his response, because it was such a shock to get that news that I think we were both taking in the news at the same time. And then I think we were still in shock probably when I came home to tell my son, and he was the first person I told. And to see his response brought me into what was a more reasonable way of looking at the situation. Was what about all the people I love? And they're going to be left behind, and think of how difficult this is going to be for them. And the transformation that came on was, there's no need to worry about me. Like, you don't have to fuss yourself about how ill I am, because it's happening to me, and I'm going to go with it, and I'm all right with that. I'm not suffering. So it was helpful to me, and it was helpful to them. And so the experience was harrowing in some ways, but through it all, I could find peace throughout the whole thing. It was remarkable.
Your conversion, I want to ask you, there's conversion stories out of there, throughout the world. There's conversion stories that are as unique as fingerprints, but some have a theme that's a little bit more like Saul being knocked off his horse and being struck blind, and his life is forever changed. And others, and I would include myself in this is my type of conversion in 2010. It's more like 1,000 brushstrokes on a portrait or a painting that you're not really sure what the painting looks like until the finishing touches, and all of a sudden there you are. You're there. You're walking into the arms of the Catholic faith. Would yours be more of the latter version as well, 1,000 brushstrokes, or would you say this moment, or was it falling off your horse and a painting? Not to mix metaphors. How would you describe the road to the Catholic Church?
Well, I would say that I spent a long time meditating. I told you last time, and so I was searching. From the time I was 13, I started to meditate. So very young. And I continued to meditate right up until I started to pray every day instead. And then I realized that it was more profound for me to be praying with God's Word, that was more profound than meditation. And it brought me much more understanding to where I was and what I should do next than meditation. And so I think that it was somewhat methodical. You know, the moment was transformative, and a place that I will never forget, or even I won't be able to put that behind me ever. So there was a moment, real conversion moment. And I think God had been trying to find me, trying to bring me up into His hands over and over and over again. So I needed something. And that's the thing, I think God will continue to challenge us. He'll challenge us until we turn towards Him. And God help us with that. Because, pay attention, because God will continue to try.
and to your point, which is so well said, in the midst of suffering, there's a lot of times people are saying, why? And you're looking back and saying, I'm not saying, you may be saying, I I don't fully comprehend all the aspects of the why, but there are some answers. There are graces that emerge in the midst of the suffering that led you to this place. That makes, and the great line of faith is believing in advance, but only makes sense in reverse. You just got to hope and believe. There's got to make some sensibility out of this, and then ultimately you're looking back and saying, I'm starting to see some of that sensibility. So to those of us, those who are listening out there, it strikes me that suffering, nobody wants to suffer, but the bottom line is that there's oftentimes grace that's in the shroud of the mystery that may emerge. It sounds like the grace emerged in your suffering itself.
Oh, for sure it did. It's been very interesting to look back, like you said. Yeah. So one of the things that I learned about my grandmother, because my mom's mom, so she was the philosophical one. My dad's mom, she was a grandmother that at her funeral, every one of her grandchildren thought they were her favorite. That's what she was like. You know, she was a wonderful woman. I was very blessed with my grandparents. But, so I was brought into the Catholic Church, and then we were on tour. And I hurt my back. I don't know how I hurt my back. I think too many airplanes.
Sure. Yeah.
Too many airplanes and too short.
Yes.
I need a car seat. Actually, that's really what the whole answer is. But so I hurt my back. My husband, he was still on tour, but really not feeling well for about a month. Fevers, sweating at night, like getting up, giving a talk, but just not getting any better. And my daughter was going through some trouble in her relationships. And I have weekly meetings with the priest who took me through the catechism. And he suggested that I speak to this other priest who's in Newfoundland, in an outpost,
Sure.
But he said he's a good friend, and I think that you could talk to him. And so I thought about it for a couple of days, and I thought, okay. Yeah. So I sent him a text, and we talked a little bit by text, and then we set up a Zoom call. And this was probably in May, I think. And he turned the camera around, showed me there was still snow outside. He had a down-filled coat on under his cassock, and he said, God has sent me here, I don't know for how long. But he was Mexican, right? He was Mexican.
This was not his home territory.
This was not his home territory. So that was kind of funny. But he started to pray in Spanish, so I don't know exactly what he was saying. And then he would ask me questions, and he said, are you close to your grandmother? And I said, well, I was close to both my grandmothers. And he said, does your grandmother have short hair? And I said, well, yes, but they both did,
Yeah.
So he said, well, she's with you now. That's what I see. I see that she's with you now. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And so I noted it. And then after the call, there were many other things he said, but after the call, I was thinking, oh, yeah, I was talking to my sister and my brother just the week before. We were trying to organize the celebration of life for my father this summer.
Sure.
And for some, I don't know why, but they're older than me. They're quite a bit older than me. My brother's 8 years older than me. My sister's 5 years older than me. They said when we were baptized, I don't know why we talked about it, Grandma baptized us. It wasn't our parents. It was Grandma that baptized. So I phoned them and I said, so which Grandma was it that baptized us? Oh, it was my mom's mom that baptized. I thought, isn't that interesting? Because my grandmother was born Catholic. You know, she sent me her mother's, or she didn't send me, my cousin sent me my great-grandmother's rosary.
Sure.
So they were Polish Catholics. And she left Catholicism when she was a young woman. And she changed our religion to Protestantism. She baptized us into the Protestant church. But I think imagine her going to see her daughter and all of her children and realizing not only has she left the Catholic Church and gone to the Protestant church, but her daughter hasn't baptized any of her children.
Right.
What do you think she would feel like? Right? Oh my goodness, what have I done?
Yeah,
really?
yeah,
What have I done? Oh, I have to make this right. So one day when my mom and dad are gone golfing, she takes us all to the church and baptizes us. All four of us. And of course, I don't know about this because I'm just a baby. And I've finally heard of this. And now she's with me.
Wow.
I think, well, she's with me because I came back to the Catholic Church.
How do you like that?
And so now it's all good.
That's beautiful.
Isn't that something?
It's really something.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, you alluded to it. So many people go through, now it's called OCIA, the Order of Christian Initiation of Adults. You were working, obviously you've been on the road and so on. So you had to have a little bit of a more personalized process of, what was the process you went through to ultimately arrive to Easter Vigil? Were you working with one priest?
Yeah,
It was
one priest.
Catechism, reading from the catechism effectively?
No, it was, we had Zoom calls every week.
Yeah.
We had Zoom calls every week, and he went through the specific themes of the catechism, but it wasn't always, it was more than the catechism.
Sure.
So it would have been talks maybe he had given, and so then he would go through, but he described the church and the hierarchy of the church and everything. So I understood everything about the workings of the church and my belief in God. And it was interesting when I first started praying the Rosary, and you repeat the creed at the beginning. I believe in God and I believe in Jesus Christ, His Son. That used to take me a while to absorb, because I was in the Protestant church. I wasn't given that lesson that gave me a belief in Jesus Christ.
Sure.
Yeah. So that in all, because it asks you, do you have any hesitation to come into the church? And I would say on that journey, that was the only hesitation I had. But praying the Rosary over the years has, and with that intention of coming closer to Jesus Christ, that has happened. And so I don't feel any, by the time I got into the Catholic Church and was there receiving the sacrament, I didn't feel any hesitation at all.
Was that probably, many people have reservations that kept them from the Catholic Church. Many of them are wrestling with them through their formation process. Would you say that was probably the biggest reservation that you kind of overcame, if you will, coming in?
I would say a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Yeah.
And was it the notion of a personal relationship, or was it the notion of Christ as a fully human, fully divine? Not to get too theological.
I think it was my relationship with Him, accepting Him as my Savior. That was it. Yeah.
What's interesting is a lot of people don't think Catholics really believe as much in a personal relationship with Jesus, and it's front and center. I mean, it is. I mean, they think of the church being so sprawling and hierarchical and dogmas and doctrines and orders and history and so on and so forth, and that the personal relationship with Jesus Christ, that's something that's over in the evangelical side or whatever. And it's like, if anybody's read like Benedict XVI or the Church Fathers or the many saints and Therese of Lisieux and so on, this personal encounter that's constantly there, it is at the front and center. And I love the notion that for you, it was the Catholic Church is asking me to draw deep, deep into this personal encounter, and I want to make sure I'm kind of ready for that. So that's a pretty profound testimony. Segment 2, entering the church. As Tammy Peterson neared the Easter Vigil, the National Catholic Register wrote, quote, Tammy had just been in for her first confession a few nights prior, and the experience made her burst into tears. She said, these were tears of gratitude, a gratitude that I didn't understand before. She went on to say that over the years, she always made excuses for not going to church because I didn't like the priest, or I didn't like the location or the time of the service. And I've realized these were all just excuses that have nothing to do with the reason for going. I need to go and be there with God. So in his book, The Catholic Church and Conversion, G.K. Chesterton noted this: it is impossible to be just to the Catholic Church. The moment a man ceases to pull against it, he feels a tug towards it. The moment he ceases to shout it down, he begins to listen to it with pleasure. The moment he tries to be fair to it, he begins to be fond of it. So, Tammy, not that you were ever unfair to the Catholic Church, but what happened when you began to be truly immersed in fairness to the Catholic Church?
Oh, well, when I grew up a Protestant, so, and I left the Protestant church like many, many people do when I was about 13 years old. Started doing other things, thought I didn't need it, right? And there was that, and then I think I was through high school, I didn't go back. I may have gone back for specific reasons, but I didn't go back for regular services on Sundays. And then when I was in my 20s, I went sometimes, right? I went sometimes. In fact, I spent a year in Montreal, and this was still the Protestant church, going to a beautiful church on Sherbrooke Avenue. And I went for a whole year, every Sunday. But, you know, I went by myself. I didn't invite my husband to go with me.
Sure.
And I asked him about that. I said, so I went to church, you know, by myself for a whole year there. He said, well, I think if you would have invited me, I would have gone. And it's true, you know, if I invite him now, he goes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So he's going with me. If I go, he goes.
Yeah.
And so that's probably true. And I did find in my life, I didn't insist. There were lots of things, and I think women, more than men, have a tendency to not insist for whatever reason. You know, we're not as disagreeable as men. So men being, we call it disagreeable, but I think what it is it's more willing to put themselves on the line.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So I don't think I was willing to put what I really wanted on the line. I would let it sit in the back.
Yeah.
Right? And so I have learned since coming into the Catholic Church to put myself on the line. But it's not, I know now that I'm not alone in doing that.
Right.
So it's not as scary.
Yeah.
Right? It's less scary.
Yeah.
What was your question again? Tell me.
No, just exactly. No, just you've answered it very well. Just about
Okay.
beginning fair, when you become fair to the Catholic Church. And I love the notion.
Oh yeah, right.
And when you were, like you said, you're in your 20s, you're going to the Catholic Church at that time for a year. You said, is that correct?
No.
Or there was a Protestant church at that
Protestant
time.
church.
Gotcha.
Too.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me move as we
So all of my time in the Catholic Church has been good.
Yeah.
Because by then I'd decided. I had made my decision, and every time I've gone there, it's been good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me about the emotion that was that you were experiencing as you were approaching the vigil. And so for many people who aren't Catholic or haven't come into the Catholic Church or are unfamiliar with the process, RCIA or the formation typically is it's a lifelong formation. But for me, when I went through RCIA, which is now OCIA, the Order of Christian Initiation of Adults, you went through a modified version with the priest that you're working with because you're traveling so much. It's the formation over time to make sure that you're prepared for the full reception of the sacraments of the Eucharist, and there's involving confession, there involves the reception of the Eucharist, a certain apprehension, although it's impossible to fully apprehend what the Eucharist on this side of the grave, but you're getting prepared for that moment to enter into the church. And there's a lot of emotion that builds as one kind of draws nearer and nearer. And my question was, what were your emotions as you saw the Easter Vigil coming closer and closer? You knew the Eucharist would be awaiting you. You knew that you would be a member or a part of the Catholic Church. How did you feel?
Well, and there was also the confession, too,
Yes.
that I hadn't had in the Protestant Church.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've done a lot of self-reflective work, you know, but the confession was different.
Yeah.
It was different. It was deeper. I talked about things that I hadn't talked about before in these rooms where I shared with people we were all trying to, you know, support one another. So they were supportive situations where I spoke about my troubles and how I've overcome some of these troubles. But there were some things that were from a long time ago and deep problems that I hadn't been able to face.
Yeah.
And I didn't really prepare. I didn't really know what I was going to talk about when I went in there, but I did talk. I talked about, you know, a couple of things that were more based on the present, and then this one thing from the past that, you know, is the thing that was there.
Yeah.
Right at the basis of things, and so I talked about that, and that's been interesting. You know, it was an emotional experience at the time, and then since then, I've talked about it a little bit with my family, and then got more understanding, right? Because it is us sharing our deep thoughts with the people that we love, that we can find new understanding to problems that we haven't been able to solve, right? But to have the trust to talk about those things with someone else, and not have fear of being judged harshly. Yeah, it was. So it's been a very good healing experience, that confession. Now the vigil itself, I invited some friends to come, right? I invited friends and family to come. Jordan was there beside me, and Queenie, she's the one who came with me. She's brought me into the Catholic Church, so that wasn't her purpose when she gave me a rosary.
She was the one who was praying with you for weeks, isn't that?
Yes.
Daily.
Yeah, and she said that wasn't her intention, you know.
She was accompanying you in prayer.
Yeah, no, she wasn't even going to do that. She just brought me a rosary.
Wow.
And she didn't know what I would say about it. She just, as a Catholic, she brought me a rosary because I was in the hospital and I was suffering, and so she brought me a rosary. And I guess when I got the rosary, I said, "Oh, a rosary, I don't know how to pray it." And so then she thought, "Oh, well, I guess I better help with that." And so then she showed me that day. Well, then she'd only told me one mystery.
Yeah.
So then she had to come back the next day and tell me another mystery. Pretty soon she's there for 4 days.
Yeah.
Well, after 4 days, it was starting to look like something that was going to repeat, and it did then for 5 weeks.
Wow.
And so she was the one, she was my sponsor. And so she stood beside me in the church as well. But I invited good friends who were there. And of course, at Easter, the church is completely full.
Yeah.
Right? It's completely full. And there were quite a few adults. There were some adults being baptized, and then there were some adults who were going to receive communion. And it's the candlelight service, which is just absolutely beautiful. It's dark in the church, and it's lit by all these candles, and it's a beautiful, beautiful service. So, you know, that the whole way that it's set up is humbling, especially when you're in the darkness and then you come to the light. You know, I mean, that in itself, that play, that action, that in real play, you know, that's part. The Eucharist is that also, right? It's an enactment of something to bring substance to what it is that you're taking part in. But so is the vigil, because it's darkness to light. So that's also. So it starts the excitement of finding this light, and then of course the Eucharist is the light and the blessing, and so I could feel that.
It's an amazing story, and I so appreciate you talking about confession and reconciliation on the front end, and the emotion that I know you were mentioning. The National Catholic Register had quoted you as talking about that. The difference between therapy and confession is there's absolution on the end of therapy. Can be a good thing, but there's absolution on the other end of confession. And there's been no small number of times that I've gone to confession and I heard somebody crying coming out of it, and they were not tears of grief, they were tears of joy.
Relief.
Relief.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny, again, Chesterton, sorry, but Chesterton talks about how many people would say it's morbid to go and tell your sins and your stains to other people. And he says, what I think is morbid is to live with them with unabsolved.
Yeah, well, I think it's more than morbid. I think it makes you sick.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's a good idea at all. I think that this practice of giving up your sins and being absolved of your sins is healing. Yeah. Yeah, I think it is.
The other thing I want to say is, for many people out there that are wondering, as a Catholic, how might I, in this day of trying to be inoffensive, which we all should be a little bit more bold than we are, how can I bring other people to the faith without getting in their face? And it's, in many respects, you've just articulated a perfect example of someone who came to you and gave you a rosary.
Yeah.
And simply all she did was give you a rosary with no intention otherwise. And the Spirit led where it led, and the next thing you know, there's a conversation, there's a prayer, there's another day of prayer, there's a practice, and then there's a sponsorship. That all began with the simple act of a generous gift of one person without a pre-planned 10-point agenda of saying, I care about you, this matters to me, I thought it might matter to you, and there you are. So Catholics are called to be missionaries, and sometimes missionaries begin with very small steps that God is planning that we aren't.
Yes.
Is that okay to say?
That is okay to say.
Hi, I'm Todd Warner, Managing Editor of Evangelization Culture, the journal of the Word on Fire Institute. Word on Fire is a global evangelical community that exists to provide our members with the resources they need to proclaim Christ to a secular culture. Our award-winning quarterly journal, Evangelization Culture, is offered exclusively to Word on Fire Institute members. It's a tangible representation of our mission and goal to lead with beauty in order to bring others to the knowledge of truth. Inside each issue, you'll find writing from premier scholars and inspiring pieces on literature, culture, and daily life from fellow missionaries on the journey to know and serve Christ. Get a copy of the current issue of the Evangelization Culture Journal for free by visiting wordonfire.org/journal. Thank you, and join us in bringing Christ to a hungry culture. Segment 3, Practicing Catholic. Mm-hmm. A story has been passed around that the brilliant modern writer and Catholic convert, Evelyn Waugh, was very rude to a hostess who then exclaimed, "How can you behave so badly, and you a Catholic?" Waugh replied, "You have no idea how much nastier I would be if I were not a Catholic. Without supernatural aid, I would hardly be a human being." So there are two, and by the way, if anybody hasn't read Evelyn Waugh, Brideshead Revisited, and his other works, he's fantastic. There are two misguided suppositions regarding Catholic converts to my eyes. The naive supposition that the convert is a starry-eyed idealist whose feet never again touch the ground, and the cynical supposition that believes that the glow of conversion soon wears off and the convert devolves to an even worse hypocrite than they were before. How have you experienced the walk of faith? Now you are 2 months or so after the Easter Vigil. How has your walk of faith evolved?
So I told you I hurt my back.
Yeah.
So at the vigil, I was using a cane because I hurt my back right before the vigil. It's kind of it was strange. You know, my daughter, my husband was on tour. Mm-hmm. He came home for the vigil. It just so happened that it worked in between things. I don't know. Well, anyway, it was providential. It worked out all right, and he was home. But I'd hurt my back, and he was going back on tour, and I said to my sister on the phone, I said, well, if I take enough painkillers and use my crutch, I can go out on stage. And she said, Tammy?
Not a good idea.
Doesn't sound like you're ready to go back. I said, yeah, you're right. So then we had to think of a different plan, and my daughter was having some difficult trouble. And my husband said, you know, since you can't go on tour, maybe you could just go down and stay with Mick.
Sure.
And I said, yeah, that's a good idea. So I went down to stay with her, and she was so good. She found me a doctor and found me a treatment, and I hobbled around, and for a month. I was there for a month. But my back was getting a little better. As the weeks went on, it started to get better, you know, and all of her troubles seemed to reconcile 2 days before I left.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was also very interesting, because I don't know why. When I hurt my back, I couldn't sit down, lay down, or lie down, or walk. Yeah. You know, I was not in good shape at all. And I worked with a Pilates teacher who hurt her back, and she said it took her the better part of a year to fix her problem when she had terrible referral pain down her leg. And also one of our security guys said too, it took him a year or maybe more, 2 years, to get his back, and it took me 1 month.
Amazing.
And so, I mean, I was careful, but I'm sure they were too.
Right.
And I received treatment, but I'm sure they did too.
Yep.
So, I don't know. But I was there for her, and she needed me.
Yeah.
And they were very grateful. And that was the right place for me to be.
Yeah.
And so it illustrated to my husband and I, really, that when we're on these book tours, that we told both of them, you know, if you guys need us, just tell us, and your mom can come.
Yeah.
And because I noticed Jordan had invited other people like John Vervaeke and Konstantin Kizin to travel with him. I'm like, he doesn't need me. He doesn't need me. He's got somebody there. So
he always needs you, but
I know.
but you could be needed elsewhere.
Yeah, but because of the necessity of this,
right.
he was able to see that he actually could do this without me.
Right.
He doesn't want to,
but
it works. And so if in a pinch we need to be apart, we plan to be apart. So I helped my daughter by being there. I helped my husband by now making, by having a conversation with our kids. Now, if you need us, we can be there.
Right.
I can be there.
Right.
Yeah, which is really important.
Absolutely.
And it's very important to me. I know it's important to him, but I don't know, as a grandmother, I think that it's, I won't say more important to me, but more, I feel like there's a necessity for me to be there, maybe more than him, even though he feels it's just as important to me. I feel being in close proximity and really having my eye on the situation is what's necessary, and you've got to be there to do that. And now I feel the freedom to do that if it's necessary. And so, things have changed since I've been in the church. I'm much more likely to, what did it say? I was a better mother, a better boss, listen better, all kinds of things, you know?
Yeah.
And so then these things work out better. Even though they're difficult, they seem to work out better. I don't know.
Well, it makes a lot of sense, though, because, again, we're a multitasking, highly efficient, uber-controlling group of beings. We're human beings that want to wrest control, and it drives us into the dirt.
Yes, it's hard.
And when you it's sort of like you relax a little bit and you surrender and you have humility and you open yourself up to God's graces, as one priest would say, you leave space for gifts. All of a sudden the gifts flood in, and not only do they flood in, but you start looking around and saying, that was eerie. That was eerie that this happened the way that it did. And as my wife would say, coincidences are the work of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
I mean, so
I agree.
We don't need to drive so aggressively. We don't need to control so insistently. We can open ourselves up to God and live wondrously. Back to your original conversation about who you are in the face of who you've become. And that is more humble, more surrendering, and therefore more of a recipient of God's graces. Extraordinary. Let me just ask you this: the prayer, the rosary, the role the rosary has played as a thread throughout your development of faith. How and when do you pray? And
I pray in the morning.
Okay. And is it the rosary, or are you having other conversations with God, if you will?
I pray the rosary and I read the Bible. Okay. And so I've prayed the rosary now for going on 5 years. And so I continue to take out the rosary every morning, but sometimes I read the Bible. I read the Bible and find something in the scripture, and then I'll pray the rosary with that.
Okay.
And that's been really good. Yeah. That's been really good because it's taken me through all the Gospels and back to the beginning of the Bible. And so that could just happen over and over again, I think, but the way I see it, because there's no end to what you can learn from the scriptures. So, and so the rosary is itself the Gospels, and so that gives you an introduction to the Gospels and an introduction to coming to Jesus through Mary. And so it's a gentle coaxing in that direction, but then reading the scripture with the rosary is deeper, more profound. And of course then I've been reading Ralph Martin. Mm-hmm. What's his book called? Let's see, right here. The Fulfillment of All Desire.
Okay.
It's about St. Augustine and Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross. Mm. And so it's about all of their teachings oof, that's a good book.
Yes.
It's a long book.
Yes.
So I pretty much am, digging through that spiritual journey. It's a spiritual journey, and it's deep, and it's long, and it's mysterious, and it goes on forever, and it brings us nuggets of wisdom for our everyday life, so.
Do you find speaking of that last book, as a Catholic and think about saints, saints are not a real strong feature. Sometimes it's frowned upon in Protestant circles and so on. What's your sense about these friends that accompany you and you accompany? What have saints meant to you in your faith?
Well, I imagine they're people who were, some of them were inspired very, very young. Not all of them were inspired young, but they experienced something that was transformative, or they had a desire that was profound inside them, and maybe their circumstances were such that it carried that even further, and so then they became someone who was devoted and really probably had a gift of communication as well. So you wouldn't be somebody who we knew all about if they weren't able to communicate, right? So they must have been communicators. But God, He sends us, right? He sends us to evangelize. So He sends us on a journey to communicate with people, and those saints are sent not only to communicate, but to suffer their trials in a way that is something to look up to for other people, because they've given themselves to what is best, and we're left with a legacy that we want to remember. And so I read the saints. I think very much in appreciation of the saints and what they have to teach us.
Segment 4, a missionary faith. Flannery O'Connor once wrote, "The truth does not change according to our ability to stomach it emotionally." G.K. Chesterton said, "The Catholic Church is the only thing that saves man from the degrading slavery of being a child of his age." Pope Benedict XVI has insisted, "Indeed, truth draws strength from itself and not from the number of votes in its favor." And finally, Jesus Christ told his disciples, "You shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free." So Tammy, thinking about your conversion to Catholicism, but also the journey you and your husband have been on, around the world, surrounding the notion of truth, in an age that is not sure what truth is, and an age that argues for either relativism or alternative ideological truths. Why does truth matter, Tammy?
Well, we're talking about really maybe the difference between truth and power, because there's a lot of power struggles going on in the world now. And what is power? Power is tyranny and a slave, right? It's the tyrant and the slave. That's how it. And a victim. We're talking a lot about victim and the victimizer. And so, what is a victim? A victim is someone who feels betrayed. They feel betrayed, and then they look to see who's betrayed them, and they judge them from. There's a multitude of options for them to take up as their weapon to talk to the victimizer as if they are justified in their judgment. So it brings this. The victimizer is looking for power, and they use weapons of resentment and unjustified anger and fear and harm. There's all kinds of different things that people choose to use as their weapon against what they feel is the betrayer. But this path that I'm on now, you have a chance to say, well, you know, I might have been treated badly, and there are the bruises. You know, the bruises are there. It's obvious that I've been, but what is it that I may have done? Is there anything in my life at all that may have come to this moment and been a part of what this is that I'm fighting about? Is there anything that I've done that has brought this about? And if you can find even a kernel of truth in there, of something that you had to do with it, then it takes you from victim to responsible. It elevates you from a low place of victimhood to a place that's a little higher and responsible. And if you can be responsible for even one, you know, you're having a fight with your husband or your wife, and you're not getting anywhere, and you go back to your bedroom and you think, what have I done in my life that may have brought this argument on? Is there anything I might have done? And just open yourself up to that. It's a meditation. Is there anything I might have done to bring this on? And when something comes, because if you ask, it will come, then you can bring that back to your husband and wife and say, maybe, you know, maybe I was overtired and I overreacted, or whatever it is that has come to you. Maybe I'm actually angry about something that happened at work, and I brought it here, and I shouldn't have done that. And you know, so maybe there's something you can bring. Then you can find a place to negotiate, right? And then if you dig deep enough and you divulge enough of yourself, then you can get to a place where you can play, and love will emerge again.
It's well said. I mean, it sounds like an examination of conscience to some extent. I mean,
sure
where one is actually, but that's the one thing I think we all know, and I'm guilty of this myself. I don't want to be wrong, and sometimes, as my dad would say to me, the truth hurts.
Yeah, right.
And so those two things work against me, and yet at the same time, you are liberating yourself to go through the pain of arriving at a greater truth, and then, like you said, you're approaching your spouse, and you're healing.
Yeah.
You're bringing yourself to healing, you're bringing the relationship to healing, and then that opens them up to be vulnerable and own what they've done wrong, and so on and so forth. No, that's a great point. It's a great point. Let me ask you this, how has material comfort, self-obsession, and ideology gotten into the way of knowing the truth, much less championing it?
Yeah, well, well, you know, the school system, little kids, when they're in school, what are they there for? They're there to what? Learn obedience. It looks like that's mostly what it is. You know, they're put in rows.
Yeah.
They're put in rows. They only speak when they're asked to speak. You know, so there's nothing out of line. Everything, it's about obedience. There's not a lot of creativity. You don't get marks for creativity. You get marks for obedience. And we keep our kids in school from now the time of when they're just toilet trained. Right? They have to be toilet trained before you can go to school.
Right.
And then you stay in school till you're 18. And then you go to university, and so you're 22.
Right.
So I don't know if that's necessary. You know, I'm starting to think maybe it's not so necessary.
Yeah.
That maybe we're keeping kids the best times of their lives, like really from 16, they can have a driver's license, you know, when they're 16.
Yeah.
So they can go out on the highway, but they still have to be in school. So maybe we could stop keeping them in these places of quiet, orderly observance till maybe 16, maybe 14 even, but maybe 16. And then they could be done university by the time they're 20.
Sure.
right? And then they could get married and have kids at a reasonable time of life, so that by the time they're 30, they already have 4 children, and they're 30 years old, and they have a husband and a wife, and they have a degree. Because you know that a woman's educational status is helpful to children.
Right.
A man's educational status doesn't really matter, but a woman's educational status really helps the children attain more. So it's important to find what it is that you want to do in your life. But it's also important, and ultimately more important, to have a family, to get married and have children, because that will make you into an adult. You know, the university, that'll give you a career, possibly, or at least it'll give you more understanding towards some form of endeavor. But the family, that'll give you learning and service for the rest of your life. And so there's nothing like, I remember when I had my first baby, and we went home to see Jordan's family. They didn't have any babies yet because he was the eldest in the family. So I was the youngest in my family, so I never noticed this with my family. But when I went to see his family, everybody, we went to the lake and we put up a jolly jumper, and Michaela was bouncing in a jolly jumper, and there had to be 5 adults in the room, and we just sat there and watched Michaela. And I said, "Isn't this glorious? It has nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
I've come in, Jordan's come in, but this baby came in. It's all about the baby." And I thought, isn't that a change in things? And isn't it a wonderful change?
Yeah. It's as things ought to be.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I mean, by the way, becoming a parent is when you hopefully, if you're doing it right, it's when you stop loving yourself quite as much as you, now all of a sudden, it's an outward focus that is immersed in love. Doesn't mean you don't love yourself. It's just that you're probably less of a narcissist and you're more of willing the good of the other with this child, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
In the concluding words of the concluding chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, Christ says, "All power in heaven and on earth have been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you, and behold, I am with you always until the end of the age." So to think that after informing the disciples of his immense power, he then says, he charges them with the foremost responsibility to make disciples of all nations. It's kind of daunting. I am the God of the universe, and here's my command to you to go and bring people to the faith. Why would you say we are called to bring the truth of Catholicism to others?
Well, because life is so much better this way. That's why. And so you want that for other people. You want other people to feel loved and to and feel like they have agency in the world, that they'll be able to make a difference towards good. And so this gives you, peace, and it gives you purpose, and you're not going to be. You might end up in a situation that's difficult, because there are difficult things to do in life, but you won't be there alone. And so, when I see someone I pray for people who don't have God in their life. I pray for them, because I know that for me, I'm not lonely. I'm never lonely, and I'm always looking for what I can do to help others and to bring whatever. I pray for people to find God. Right? That's really what you have to do, is pray for people to find God and do the next right thing. And whatever the next right thing is, you'll see. And that, I think, is what God is intending for us, is to pay attention to the present, right? Pay attention to the present and make the next right move. And you don't have to plan further. You can dream further than that, but you don't have to plan further than that, because it'll become obvious what the next right thing is if you're paying attention. You can dream. You should dream. You should dream about who you could be and if everything was going right, if everything was going as well as it could be, dream about where that might be, and then follow the dots, and it'll take you there.
That's amazing. You made me think of St. Augustine's, the notion of the God-shaped hole. We all have this God-shaped hole, and for people who are unfamiliar with St. Augustine saying this, we are in search for this fulfillment that will rest only when we rest in God. And so we have this emptiness until it's filled with God, and we try to fill it with other things. We try to fill it with honor and power and pleasure and wealth. We try to fill it with other alternative dogmas or ideologies or doctrines and so on. And invariably we get a little buzz, a little hit from it, and then we find ourselves even more empty than we were before until we rest in God. I'm curious, do you feel like the God-shaped hole has been filled for you?
Yeah, I do. If I had any tendencies to, when I was feeling sorry for myself, to shop online, or because that's an easy one.
Yeah.
That's an easy one. I don't do that anymore. And it also helps you to become aware of what you might be doing to try to take the place of God. Because once you have that relationship and the peace that ensues because of it, if you forget that, if you forget to be with God, and you start looking towards drugs and alcohol and being the brightest and the best in the room, or whatever it is that you're going for, you find that you get into difficulty with it, and it's not. So I interviewed a woman recently. Her name is Immaculée. She was in Rwanda in the genocide. Ooh. And she was in a bathroom for 3 months with 7 other women in a pastor's home. And she could hear the genocide going on outside. But the day she left her family, her father gave her his rosary and said, "Take this with you. I don't want you to stay at home. I want you to go to the pastor's house." And so she went to the pastor's house as she was told, and the pastor hid her in the bathroom, and she was there with the rosary, but she was angry. Wow. She was angry because she could hear outside people fighting and the genocide happening, and she was imagining getting an airplane and bombing the place. Like she was really. But then she'd pray. But then she would, she had this rosary, right. So she was also praying, and she started to understand when she was angry, she could feel her whole body tense, yes. and she wouldn't even be breathing deeply anymore, And then she would pray the rosary, and this peace would come upon her, and she thought, "Oh!" And she had time to reflect because they weren't allowed to speak or anything in this because they had to be quiet. And she started realizing, "Oh, I'm much more peaceful when I'm praying the rosary." So then she started to pray more and more and more, and develop this peacefulness instead, and stop with the revengeful thoughts. Wow. And she got out of there eventually. They were starting, the French had come in, but they didn't know what exactly the French were doing, right? So they didn't know whether they should go outside. But she just thought, I think it's time. Because she'd been reflecting, she just felt, I think it's time that we go out and find our way again. And so she did, and it wasn't easy, but she had prepared herself in this little bathroom, taught herself English by asking the pastor to bring her a book, and then taught herself to type on a piece of paper and thinking, I'm going to need to know English, and I'm going to need to know how to type. And she ended up working in the UN. Exactly what she needed to be able to speak English and to type. And, her story is absolutely amazing.
It's striking because, to your point, and this makes me think of your experience with your cancer, again, faith and formation happens in the crucible so much of the time. It happens in the crucible.
Yep.
And to be able to, again, in the midst of it, not be able to see it, and that doesn't mean that there isn't tragedy and that there aren't unresolved questions and so on, but the bottom line is that it's a forge of fire that can lead people to deep, deep intimacy with God. And there's a battle going on, like you said. It's almost the evil forces and then the graces of God within this one woman in this small bathroom.
Yeah.
And God wins for a time on this veil
Yeah.
of tears we're in. But the bottom line is, what an extraordinary formative experience for her to arrive at God.
Oh, yeah. And she's a force now, I'll tell you.
Final question. Pope Benedict XVI wrote, "The one who has hope lives differently." And so, Tammy, I'd ask you, how is your hope doing now that you're a Catholic?
Oh, my hope is just fine. Really, my hope is just fine. You know, I know that there's trouble. There's definitely trouble, but I would rather be here with God than hopeless and thinking that that when the world ends, we're all going to go to hell. So that's not where I want to be. That's not where I've chosen to be. Yeah.
Thank you. Tammy Peterson, wife, mother, and Catholic.
I'm Catholic.
Thank you. It has been just a pleasure talking with you.
My pleasure. Thanks.
So I've been thinking. In speaking with Tammy Peterson about her conversion to Catholicism, one word kept recurring in my mind: humility. What does it take to become Catholic? It takes humility. Now, to be sure, we live in an age that is bold and brash, assertive and aggressive. Work hard, be your best, become the master of your own destiny. Let nothing stand in your way. This seems to be the antithesis of humility. Now, don't get me wrong, stories of grit and growth, self-assertion, and the overcoming of obstacles are surely necessary and undoubtedly inspiring. The summer's Olympics have surely shown us that highly determined people are capable of marvelous feats. But it always strikes me as a bit off when the narrative of success forgoes confessing the part about brokenness, about dependence, about surrender. This part of the story is often obscured because it is the dirty little secret, the secret that ultimately we are weak. But here is the paradox. The faith that conspicuously parades its God nailed to the cross is not afraid of weakness or averse to humility. That faith, the Catholic faith, embraces weakness and humility as central to our meaningful existence and pivotal to our eternal destiny. About our brokenness, the brilliant convert G.K. Chesterton observed, quote, "The great strength of Christian sanctity has always been simply this, that the worst enemies of the saints could not say of the saints anything worse than the saints said of themselves." Suppose the village atheist had a sudden and splendid impulse to rush into the village church and denounce everybody there as miserable offenders. He might break in at the exact moment when they were saying the same thing themselves. Close quote. Capturing our dependence, English poet and Anglican preacher John Donne wrote, "No man is an island, entire of itself." And admitting surrender during a time of spiritual struggle, novelist Flannery O'Connor confided to God, quote, "I do not know you, God, because I am in the way. Please help me to push myself aside." Close quote. We are weak and dependent on God and on each other. Is it any wonder that the two great commandments Jesus issued are to love God and to love our neighbor? We need God. We need our neighbors. Grace isn't something earned, it is something received. In describing the thorn in his flesh which he implored God to remove, St. Paul in 2 Corinthians cheered, "About myself I will not boast, except about my weaknesses." Paul receives the assurance that while the thorn will remain, God's grace is sufficient. And in accepting this difficult truth, he writes those immortal words of profound humility. "Therefore I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and constraints for the sake of Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong." C.S. Lewis, an Anglican who at times had quite the Catholic sensibility, advised, "If anyone would like to acquire humility, I think, tell him the first step. The first step is to realize that one is proud, and a biggish step, too. At least nothing whatever can be done before it." What does it take to become Catholic? Humility. Thanks be to God, the pierced Christ on the cross, for showing us how to do it. And one last thing. This week, I would recommend reading two of David's Psalms, namely Psalm 22 and Psalm 23. Psalm 22 is famously recited in part by Christ himself while impaled on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? It is a profound foretelling of the agony of abandonment endured most acutely by God the Son during his passion. Truly, it embodies the humility of a God laid low in expiation for our sins. And then read Psalm 23, the familiar verse beginning with, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." It offers breath and life to the suffocations of the psalm that precedes it. Psalm 22 and 23 serve as a microcosm of the Catholic narrative: dignity, calling, suffering, and grace. Read these psalms and then sit in wonder of our suffering and saving God. Thank you once again for joining me on the Evangelization and Culture Podcast. I'm Todd Warner, and until we meet again, keep bringing Christ to a hungry culture.